This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Hello, world, and welcome to episode 233 of Geek Leader Podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda, and today's sponsor is A2 Hosting. I've been using A2 Hosting solid-state hosting solutions for our website at geekleader.com for many, many years now, and absolutely love their support, their service, and all the features that you get. You get access to cPanel. You get all of the things that you can imagine for a great WordPress experience, including their A2 optimized WordPress, which does extra security checks, extra lockdown. You can lock down your editor file so you can't edit anything inside there. You get alerts whenever there are file changes that are done. You can also do automatic updates, backups, and more with A2 Hosting. So highly recommend it. Go to geekleader.com/A2 to get more information and to sign up for their solid state turbocharged speed hosting today. Again, that's at geekleader.com/A2. All right, Geek Leaders. Today on the show, we've got Ron Lichty, and he is the author, or co-author, I would say, of a book called Managing the Unmanageable. And what's really cool about this guest is a lot of guests come to me from publishers and things like that. I get books mailed to me all the time. And I do get some guests that come from listeners of the show that are asking me if I should reach out to someone or telling me I should reach out to someone more or less. And this is from Justin, and Justin runs a group in the Raleigh area. I think it's called the Triangle.net users group. And he was talking about, he's a listener of the show. So thanks, Justin, for listening. But he was also talking about people that I should have on the show. And Ron, you were one of those people. So Ron, thank you so much for coming and welcome to the show.
Hey, you're welcome. And I'm honored and delighted.
If you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about kind of what your journey in your career has been like and what you're doing today.
Yeah, so let me start with where I am, and then I'll tell you my journey. So I grew my career to be a VP of engineering, and in 2012 left my last full-time role to consult in making software development hum. And so I parachute in as an interim VP of engineering. I do assessments for teams and organizations that are looking for that. Sort of the advice that I would have if I came in as their VP of engineering, but they've got leadership in place and they're looking for another set of eyes. I train teams in Agile. I train executive teams in Agile. Sometimes I've been doing that for about 12 or 13 years. And I coach a handful of software engineering leaders at pretty much every level. I started in tech as a programmer, and I spent 7 years as a programmer. I loved programming. I wrote multimedia applications. I wrote compiler code generators. I wrote compiler cross compiler code generators. I wrote embedded microcontroller device software. I've got a few patents and a couple of devices. At a point at which software, in order to get a software patent, it had to be connected to hardware, or you couldn't get a patent on it. And I really loved programming, but I was beginning after 7 years to become curious about managing. And I was in a two-person consulting company, and you don't become a manager in a two-person consulting company. And so I was curious, and I had written a book on assembly language programming, a popular book on assembly language programming. So this tells you how long ago that was. And it was a microchip that Apple Computer used in one of its computers, and Apple made me an offer to come create and manage a product management group in development tools. And so I went to Apple as a manager and cut my teeth as a manager at Apple, and spent and so for this conversation, let me note that I became a manager at Apple of product management, but it was development tools, so it was very techy. And I spent a year and a half doing that. Apple reorged about every 6 months, so I went through 2 reorgs, and the third one, it eliminated my level of management. And so I thought, well, what do I want to do next? And I thought, I'm going to be a programmer again. I found a programming job inside Apple. It was wonderful for about a month, and then they made me a manager. And so I continued being a manager. 6 months later, reorg. What do I want to do? I'll be a programmer again. Again, about a month in, they made me a manager, and I realized, and it took me 3 times to realize that to have that ongoing willingness to let go of the incredible ecstasy of solving hard programming problems, to be willing to let go of that. And part of letting go of that was realizing that I was making a difference in the lives of my teams, that I was making a difference as a manager. And that difference was creating an environment in which they could have that ecstasy experience, in which they could have those highs that I was going to give up in order to do that. And so I got to manage the team that was developing the UX of the Macintosh Finder for 3 years. And I left for my first director of engineering role. It was at Berkeley Systems. So anyway, so some people may be old enough to remember screensavers, to remember saving CRT screens from burning in, and Berkeley Systems had these wonderful, flighty, entertaining screensavers that you could change the channel, and flying toasters and fish and moire patterns and some wonderful stuff. And so I got to be director of engineering for screensavers and games at Berkeley Systems. I left there for a couple of other startups. One inside of a very large company called Fujitsu, worlds away. It was an online animated virtual world. And after the third entertainment startup, I got recruited into Charles Schwab, the stock brokerage, as a director of engineering still. And I stayed there for about 7 years and was promoted to a VP of engineering there. Led an initiative across all of Schwab to bring some alignment to our technology stack. Because it was a time when, up until that time, project teams could pick any technology they wanted, and our data center was pretty much supporting every technology you could possibly have. And then I left there for after 7 years for a bunch of startups and medium-sized companies, and then my last full-time job from 2010 to 2012 was at Stanford. Stanford had created a business in publishing online publishing for academic journals around the world. So we had 1,400 websites, 1,500 websites, 100 of them were books, but 1,400 of them were journals for 400 nonprofit organizations around the world that published these journals.
So let's talk a little bit about the that transition where, you mentioned how hard it was to let go of the coding, and solving the problems. And I think all leaders seem to go through that kind of phase, at least technology leaders, where, we become a manager for either by choice or because we get promoted into it and we kind of have to. I know that was my situation, where it was like, if you want to raise, you got to be a manager now. You're at that point where we're not going to let you, just be a coder forever. If you want to raise, you're stuck. So of course I did. So I said, yeah, I'm interested in management, and I became a manager. And I kind of sucked at it at first because I didn't want to let go. I just wanted to do everything. And in my mind, I was doing everything right. And I needed everybody to do it the way I was doing it, because the way I was doing it was right. And I kind of, squashed everybody's creative ability to write code and solve problems, and was not able to let go, was not able to help that. And what helped me going through that process was the fact that someone told me once that, I don't scale. They're like, John, you don't scale. And if you want to lead a team, you can't scale if you're, getting in there and micromanaging everything and making sure, all these things, and not letting go and letting people kind of grow and develop themselves. Did you go through an experience kind of like that?
So mine was different, but I want to note that your experience and mine both had this characteristic that and I think it's the thing you go through the first time when you go from being an individual contributor to a manager, but you go through it again when you go up the ladder. And that is that the thing that makes you successful in your previous role gets in your way at your next role. And certainly the thing that made me successful as a programmer was being able to shut out the world.
Yeah.
Being able to, I could climb into the microprocessor and listen to the gates open and close. I could become one with my code and just shut out everything else. And I got really good at that. And now I've become a manager, and the role of a manager is to not only put a welcome mat out in front of your door, but to proactively invite interruptions.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, and those of you who are programmers who are listening are going to be shocked at this, but that is the role of a manager, is to invite interruptions, because your team's interruptions are your problem, your challenge, your opportunity. And absolutely what you need to know in order to be successful, what you need to know about your team in order for your team to be successful as well. And that's also true of your peers who are no longer programmers. Now they're managers, and they're bringing you things that in fact you want to know what they're bringing you, so that you can be responsive and represent your team to those people, as well as managing up and doing the same thing in that direction. So and then that thing that makes you successful gets in your way again as you become a director of engineering and a VP of engineering. So it's.
Yeah, I see that. And how is it that we can make that shift in our mind? Because it is difficult, because you think, well, I want to. And Cal Newport talks about deep work. You want to have deep work. You want to have those hours where you can sit and focus and write your code and not be interrupted, and get to a point where you're in that flow state and things are just like happening and you're just working through it. But then as a manager, you want to be interrupted when there's a problem. You want to know about it immediately so you can take care of it. So how is it you can shift your mindset? Or how do you encourage leaders to welcome interruptions the way you're talking about?
Well, excuse me. I think it begins with awareness. And so, you and I are having this conversation now. Everyone listening has some awareness, maybe disbelief, but some awareness. And with awareness, then you can watch the interactions and recognize that, and in fact, you do need to listen. You do need to be aware and welcoming to interruptions, because that's your opportunity to be responsive. That's your opportunity to help. That's where your value add comes in. Now that you're no longer the programmer, but you've turned it over to maybe a group of people who aren't as good as you are at it. But that's the job, is to enable and encourage and grow and nurture that whole team of people to become as good as you are, or to become better than you ever were.
Than you, yeah.
And to become, and for sure become better than you are now, because you're going to atrophy. Your programming skills are going to atrophy.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that's inevitable, right? You're going to no longer be as good as you were. Once you make that crossover into management, you're going to start losing some of those skills that you had before. And a lot of times it's hard. At least for me, it was hard to come to grips and realize that I'm not as good as I used to be, because I always thought that I'm still that good. I can still do that stuff. And I think for me, it was someone asked me about building an app for them for a side project not too long ago. And I was like, yeah, I've built mobile apps before. I'll pull up Xcode, I'll look at it, and I'll start coding. And I was like, whoa, a lot's changed here. This is different. Now I've got to have 15 different icon sizes. Now I've got to have all these things. Like I didn't realize that I can make it responsive between iPads. And, there's a lot of things that have changed in the last 5 years when it comes to iOS development. And yeah, definitely I had some atrophy. That's for sure.
Right. Both atrophy and not staying current. Yeah. Both of those things.
Yeah. That's definitely affected me for sure when it came into that. So whenever someone makes that shift, and I guess you have made it to where you've gone into management and then come back into development, is that, and then back into leadership, is that a difficult thing to juggle? Is that something that once you make that shift, you should probably stick to management the rest of the way, or?
So I think that's an individual experience.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking to the founder of a company in observability, and she was saying that she had gone back and forth between being a coder and being a manager and a founder of companies, and she found it really valuable. She found that well, she got her ecstasy back, from being able to code again, and I get it. And other people, their shift into management it's permanent and it's long term, and so I think that's really individual. And I think the challenge is both. So there's a couple of challenges. You made the comment of, you became a manager and you weren't very good at it, and I became a manager and I wasn't very good at it either. And I think that's pretty common that, we don't have any experience managing. I talked to, since Managing the Unmanageable, our book came out, I've talked to a ton of audiences and of managers, and I'll say, how many of you have had one day of training in management? And it's no more than 50%.
Wow.
Have had one day of training in management.
That makes sense to me.
Then I also asked, so those of you who've had one or more days of training in management, this is not managing programmers, which I think it has its own unique aspects, which is why we wrote our book, but just managing. And those of you who've had a day of training in management, how many of you had a day of training in management before you became a manager? It's like it's under 5%.
Yeah. That does not surprise me at all. I know when I became a manager, it was, you're promoted into management, and then sometime in the next year, you have to take a management course that our company was doing. And it was, they offered it once a year for all new managers. And it was really just like, they just wanted to check a checkbox that they went through this process, and they taught you how to fill out a performance appraisal document and how to approve PTO request. For the most part.
I had the benefit that I started in management at Apple Computer, and Apple Computer, this was a long time ago, but Apple Computer was already a sizable company, and it had focused on making sure that its managers were trained and successful, and so I'm one of the people who's had a bunch of days of training in management, and every one of and so I have to tell you the story because I was about. Well, so the very first class they made me take, what my manager said, you're going to take Managers in the Law. And Managers in the Law was a half-day course at the time. It's probably a 2-day course by now, but then it was a half-day course. And I went off to take Managers in the Law, and my jaw dropped. I had no idea, the legal implications of being a manager. And so that was a really useful course. I came back and said, I could probably benefit from taking some other management courses, I bet. And the next course I took was a course called Situational Leadership. And Situational Leadership, do you know this course?
Yes, yeah, I've been into a situational leadership course as well, years later.
Yeah, it's an amazing course, and I got it about 2 months into managing. And situational leadership says, it depends on, it says how you manage each of the individual people who report to you. And this is not about programmers, but it's good for us too. How you manage each of those people is going to be unique based on their maturity as an individual contributor and based on their domain knowledge coming into the thing that they're going to work on. Those two things together. Well, my first report was a kid out of college. My first report, I walked in the door at Apple and I had 0 reports, but I had one who had been hired. He was coming out of college. And all of my managers, so there's sort of 2 general management styles. There's the micromanagers. We see a bunch of micromanagers in tech, and then we also see a bunch of managers who just throw you in the deep end to see if you can sink or swim. And all of my managers had been sink or swim managers, so that was my role model. So I had thrown Tom in the deep end to see if he could sink or swim, and I came back from situational leadership, and I pulled them into a one-on-one right away and said, Tom, I apologize. I threw you in, this is a kid out of college. I threw you in the deep end, and I'm going to support you. I went through the delegation, and I'm not throwing things at you now. I'm actually going to support you in doing this. And he let out the biggest sigh of relief. And it was like, okay, that training was dead on for this one. I really learned something. It came back with some real value here.
So
And
one
then
of the things,
I'll add one more on the training thing, which is I had multiple trainings in which they taught what's it called, reflective listening. You probably had a training that had some element of reflective listening to it, of feeding, learning how to listen effectively. We get classes in speaking, but there's no classes in high school in listening. And so my wife appreciated that I took classes in reflective listening.
yeah, I still struggle with listening sometimes, as far as I always feel like, and maybe it's because of being in technology and wanting to solve problems and having that eagerness to do that. You want to jump to a conclusion quickly, and realizing that no, sometimes you just got to let the story finish first and then think about what you're going to do. And
yeah.
So let me ask you this. You mentioned one of the reasons why you wrote this book, and one of your experiences is that managing software developers, programmers, tech people is a little bit different sometimes than just general management. And I have the same kind of thoughts, because that's part of the reason why I did a podcast, targeting technical leadership versus just regular, general business leadership, because I do see some differences. There's a lot of similarities, but there's also a couple of unique points that make it a little bit different. What are some of the things that you've seen that do make managing software developers a little bit different?
So I think there's this whole, and I don't know whether it's true or not, but there's this whole right brain, left brain kind of idea that our left brain is very analytical and our right brain is very artistic, and more jobs than not are one or the other of those two things. And so, I've given talks to hardware engineering managers who've got, and you don't develop electronics hardware without having some software in it these days. And I've had inevitably have people come up to me afterwards and say, what is it with these software developers? Why are they so different than my hardware developers are? And they'll say, what's with these software engineers? What's so different from these hardware engineers? And hardware engineering is engineering. Civil engineering is engineering. It's all left brain. It's all putting together components and doing things you've done before. And software development is half of that, but the other half is art. The other half is craft. And we craft things. I had a friend when I started programming. I had a friend who was both programming and writing books about programming back then. And he said, writing software is more like writing a novel than writing Managing the Unmanageable, or writing that book about the 65816 microprocessor. And how to program it in assembly language. With a novel, you start with a blank page, and you envision and you build things out of thought stuff, and that's what programming is. And so you've got people who are leveraging both the left side and the right side of their brain. They're both very artistic craft. The confluence of music and programming is really high. I don't know whether you've taken a look at this, but my co-author he paid his way through college as a guitarist and musician, and teaching guitar and being in bands. And I play the piano and the guitar and the played and the trumpet. And the crossover with music and programming is really high. So we programmers are different, and I think that we may lend ourselves to that. If you think back in the, we took world history and apprenticeships and craft and I think coming into programming, that's we tend to apprentice ourselves to better programmers and work with better programmers and get mentored by better programmers as we come in. I know this is true for me. I had a master programmer who was my guide into programming, and I can't thank him enough for that. And that's the craft side, and even though we've learned the engineering side, and that combination is a really tough one. And then and when I was at Apple and managing the group that developed the UX of the Macintosh Finder, I was hiring not only for C++, stellar C++ ability, but I was also hiring for customer empathy. And I think I think more of us need to hire for customer empathy, actually. But I think that describes the mix of who we need to be as programmers and who we need to be as programming teams, and how we need to think.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. You mentioned music and development, and I've definitely seen that. Some of the best coders that I've ever worked with have been musically inclined. And I gave a TED talk back in 2015 where I talked about how being in what's considered a technology field is not just about math and numbers like everybody thinks it is. It's also about creativity and solving problems in a creative way. And, if you are ever saying, well, I want to go into computers because I'm not a creative person, then you're absolutely in the wrong field. If you go into computers and technology, you have to be creative. That's our whole job, is to create solutions to problems that people didn't even know were problems years ago. So, we are being creative. But yeah, when you talk about empathy, that's one of the things that I've probably said I struggle sometimes with being empathetic, and it's a skill, not necessarily something you're born with, but it's something you can acquire, and you can learn how to realize that people are looking at things from different lenses and different perspectives. And, how can you put yourself in those shoes and become better at that? And, from a software development thing, I think diversity is one of the things that also helps with that, because you can have people on your teams from different backgrounds and different perspectives that can play into how you talk about using Finder. How do you use Finder? Well, I grew up this way, so I should see things, coming from this perspective. And someone else says, well, I remember on my computers, I had a Commodore 64 and we did it this way. Let's look at it this way, and have a different perspective and put those two together, and you'll get something that is better impactful for the larger group.
I heard an ACM talk. ACM is the Software Professional Association.
Yeah.
Stands for Association for Computing
Machinery. Yep.
I heard an ACM talk by two professors at I think the University of Oregon or Oregon State, and they had looked at the tools we use as programmers and gender, and what they realized is that men and women, this is not universal, but there's a tendency for men and women to use interface differently. And the tools we use as programmers are generally written by men, with the assumption that we know how to use tools. And oh, by the way, there's and there's a bunch of men, it's a minority, but there's a bunch of men who need that other interface, who are and sort of the exploratory versus, there's I forget exactly the wording that they used on it, but it was really interesting that that we're shutting out part of the diversity just by how we design our own tools. And I thought, wow, that's, going back to that conversation we were having about awareness, I think we really need to open up our minds to the awareness of that we take for granted. We take a ton of stuff for granted.
So one of the things, this is just a little aside that while we're talking about this, that he struck a chord with me. When I was managing is the first team that I had that built mobile apps. And when we first started rolling our mobile apps, we had a QA person that got moved over to my team from a different department. And I wanted her to come to our team to add a little bit of diversity because most of my team were males, and we wanted a female and and another female, and she was an older female at the time. So most of the people on my team were in their, I had some in the 20s, some in the 30s. I had one guy that was in his 50s. And then we brought over this lady that was in her upper 50s doing QA. And she had a totally different perspective than anybody else on the team. And she made our interfaces so much better by pointing out flaws or places where we had too many taps. There was too many. Well, why didn't we just put it here and make it quicker and easier? Because we didn't think of that, and just her perspective being a little bit different made our applications so much more successful and easier to use. And it's just one of those things that in hindsight, that was probably one of the best things that happened to our team, but we had no idea at the time.
Great story, John.
So tell me a little bit about, you mentioned before we started recording on that you're managing the unmanageable. You have a second edition where you added some stuff in about Agile. And, I've heard a lot of different takes on Agile software development. And I've gone through the process before. We were a waterfall shop and we went through the digital transformation, became a Scrum shop. And going through these processes, what is the role of a manager of a software development team, coming out the backside of this, and is it still important?
It absolutely is important. Managers are absolutely important. The role shifts dramatically because the role really shifts from manager in charge to team in charge. The goal of Agile. And these words are embedded in the Agile Manifesto from 20 years ago. It was 20 years ago, January or February, that they wrote the Agile Manifesto. And those were the people who wrote that were the people who were designing Scrum and the people who were designing extreme programming and the people designing Kanban and various other approaches that they applied this umbrella term Agile to. And what's embedded in there are the words self-organizing teams, and I think the core so I think we all struggle with it. What's a self-organizing team? In fact, the Scrum Guide just changed the wording in the Scrum. They revised the Scrum Guide every 2 years, and the last one they changed it from self-organizing to self-managing to try to be clearer about it. And I don't think that's clear at all, frankly. But when I think about it, I tried to come up with helpful metaphors for me and I train teams in Agile for the teams I train, and I think that the goal of a self-organizing team is for every single member of the team to be a leader of that team. It's like only one at a time, only one leader at a time. Let's not get into that. But leadership that passes transparently among all of the members of the team, so that when you've got experience, when you've got expertise, when you've got insight, you step up and become the leader for however long that makes sense, and you keep listening because somebody else may bring their experience and expertise to the fore. And the metaphor I realized is, if instead of writing software, we were an acting troupe, what kind of acting troupe would we be? Well, we'd probably be an improv group, because in improv, every single member of an improv troupe steps up. It keeps listening. There's a rule of thumb in improv that's yes and. Everybody in improv learns that rule of thumb. And you're always saying yes to the scene that your improv group is creating, and you're looking for, and can I add that? Can I add something from my experience, from my thoughts, from where my brain's going? And there may come an opportunity to do that. And so you basically become the leader of the troupe, but you have to keep listening because somebody else is going to do that. And it may be before you thought you were going to be done with your idea. And so, and the result of that is magic. Improv troupe, I think improv troupes create magic. If instead of doing acting, we were doing music, what kind of music would we be doing? Probably free jazz, because in jazz, every member of the jazz group solos, and they don't play only by themselves. Everybody plays behind them. Everybody figures out where they're going and fits in. And at some point, somebody goes from fitting in to being the leader, and the person who was leading has to keep listening for that transition to take place magically. And when you see it happen, you think, wow, that's magical. And that's what a Scrum team is. That's what an Agile team is that's what a self-organizing team is where everybody, the intern leads sometimes because they're bringing something from, if we don't have an intern who can lead, we probably hired the wrong intern, because they should be able to bring something from college that is newer than any of us when we went to college learned.
Yep, absolutely. I know that's one of the things I tell my students, like, the things that you learn here will be outdated by the time you graduate. So focus on how you learn and how you can communicate what you've learned.
Yeah. So you were asking about managers.
Yeah.
So managers need to foment that kind of environment, and it's different from telling teams what to do. It's now or throwing them in the deep end to see if they sink or swim. It's supporting the team and becoming that kind of team, and that kind of self-organizing team, that kind of jazz group, that kind of improv troupe, and supporting the team. I think the metaphor of jazz and of improv are leave out. Well, so what's a manager do? And so there's a third, and so I've come up with a third metaphor. I had a management coach at Schwab. I was still a director of engineering. I wanted to be a VP of engineering. I had a management coach that Schwab provided, and she put a book in my hand and said, "You have to read this book." And it was a book. It was a book called Sacred Hoops. So first of all, I have to say I'm not a sports guy, and I'm really not a basketball guy. And Sacred Hoops, it's about basketball. It took me a while to realize that. And it was written by a guy named Phil Jackson, who you may know who Phil Jackson is. I had no idea who Phil Jackson was. And at the time, he was the coach of the Chicago Bulls. He went on then to be the coach of the LA Lakers. And he had inherited, so I knew the name of one basketball player, Michael Jordan. He had inherited a team, the Chicago Bulls, with Michael Jordan on it. And Michael Jordan was setting every record in basketball, and the team was losing. The Chicago Bulls were a losing basketball team with the best player in basketball. And Phil Jackson's job was, and I think this is our role as managers, create a team, not Michael Jordan and other players, create a team called the Chicago Bulls in which everybody stepped up, and everybody was not in fear or awe of Michael Jordan, but everybody was stepping up. And he created this thing called the triangle offense, which I still can't figure out, because triangles have 3 points and there are 5 people on the court, as far as I can tell, in basketball. But he created this thing that is basically around reflective listening on the court. It's around being responsive to the other players on the court. He says, when my team is firing, they don't look, not only does the other team not know what my team's going to do next, my team doesn't know what my team's going to do next. And when they're in trouble, they don't look at me, they look at each other. You see teams that will look over at their coach when they're in trouble. Not my team. That's the goal is for them to look to each other and be responsive. And then he's written a more recent book called 11 Rings. And in 11, turns out when you win a championship, they give you jewelry. And he's got 11 rings from being a player and being a coach of the Bulls and of the Lakers. And he says, when my team is firing, they're like a jazz group. And I thought, oh, they're like a Scrum team. This is awesome.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And give you some insight on that triangle offense with 5. It's because it's 3, 2, and 1, like a pyramid. You figure at the bottom, that's where the people go across. But anyway, Phil Jackson, I think that's a great analogy and good insight when you think about a Scrum team. And one of the things that I like to think about is, even though those teams are operating, the basketball team, they're operating by reflectively listening to one another, not knowing what's going to happen next, they still have to have that mentor and that coach that's going to guide them, help them on with issues and problems that they come, remove roadblocks, get them all on the same page if there's ever any tension or arguing or things like that. And I see that as a big important part of a team manager in a Scrum environment.
Yeah, absolutely. As well as evangelizing the team to the rest of the organization, evangelizing how the team works to the rest of the organization, being the interface for the rest of the organization, removing impediments. Everybody says Scrum Masters remove impediments, but who do they escalate to? Managers.
Yep, exactly.
So there's a ton of, and then there are traditional roles like hiring and dealing with problem employees on teams. Teams all know if they've got a problem employee on the team. They expect you as a manager to know as well, by osmosis if necessary, and deal with it.
Yeah, so I think when I'm thinking about a manager in the agile environment, or really in any environment, removing roadblocks is kind of like that one. In my opinion, it's one of the number one priorities. That and taking care of your team's well-being in general. You talked a little bit about promoting your team's successes and how you're working and all that stuff out into the business. And how much of that goes through from the team manager pushing out through the product group, or is it to other areas of the business? Is it something that they should be communicating everywhere? How do you see that as something that a manager should do if they're not really actively promoting their team?
Yeah, so I'll give you two levels. One is product management, and I look at my product management counterpart as my partner. Just absolutely, I have to figure out how to, and if there's conflict there, I have to figure out how to make them my partner. I've got a product management colleague who recently wrote a blog post called "Shoulder to Shoulder," and I think that's the right metaphor. We product manager, me, engineering manager, we need to be shoulder to shoulder. And I think that's really important. And then we together are talking about the product team being development, QA, product management, design, whoever's part of our team. We together are evangelizing the team to the rest of the company. And I think that Scrum specifically has a ceremony for doing this, and the rest of the company tends not to attend. That's the demo at the end of the sprint, and the goal of the demo is to get everybody. If I can get the CEO into that demo, the team is like, the pride and the joy of being able to show off their work to the CEO. That's a big deal. And so, I think it's one of our jobs as managers is to find, I had a team that we aligned. It was a startup. They had an all company meeting every, Wednesday or something like that. We changed our sprint. Days so that it stopped on that day. And we aligned. We had the demo happen right after the company meeting. And so all you had to do was stay online. All you had to do was stay gathered. It was pre-pandemic, but there were people calling in too. So all you had to do was be there for the all company meeting, and you could be there for the demo. And so we really encouraged the whole company to be there for that demo, and it changed the relationship between the development team and the rest of the company. Now the team is showing off the visible progress of what they've accomplished over the previous week or the previous 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I think a lot of people think that the demo is just for the product manager. I think when you can, kind of grow that group of that audience that you're showing to is really helpful. I read a book. I cannot remember the name of it. It was probably 10 years ago about, it was called Marketing Your Technology Team. And it was about things that you can do to change the perspective that your software engineers, your technology team is just a cost for the company, and show that they're value derivatives, and that they show value. And one of the things was to create a technology annual report. So I've started doing that, and I continued. I've done that for, over 10 years now, where I create an annual report of things that we've done, that year. And some of it's funny, and some of it's, shows real value. I remember when there was a push probably 10 years ago about companies trying to go paperless and trying to get all your customers, instead of getting a bill in the mail, to get a paperless bill. And one of my developers just one day said, "Hey, why don't we just put a pop-up that just says, want to go green, yes or no?" And you click yes, you're paperless. If you click no, you're not paperless. Let's just put that on when they go to pay their bills online. So I took it to our product person, said, "Hey, we want to do this." I said, "Yeah, go for it. It's real simple." So we did that. And at the end of the first year, I think we were saving like $80,000 a year in printing cost, right off the bat. So we did it like with little pictures of trees and how many trees we've saved that year, and kind of a fun way to kind of promote our team and show that this person on the team came up with this little idea that seems pretty simple, but it's saving, how many hundreds of trees every year just by doing this thing.
Yeah, very nice. I think that brings up a thing for us as managers. And so in order for you to do that, you've got to keep track of the successes,
yes,
that your team has done over the year and over the year. But we need to do that. And I think we need to do that as managers for ourselves. What are the accomplishments we've made on behalf of our teams? It took me a long time to realize this, but we tend to do stuff. It's useful. We forget about it, and that's fine when we're programmers. That's not so fine when we're managers, because we need to both evangelize our usefulness as managers, but also our team's value creation. And both of those are really important. And the notion that because we or our team have done something, everyone will just recognize it is a false hope.
Yeah.
And we have to tell people about it, and we have to show them the trees that we saved, and show them the dollars that we saved for the company, and show them the dollars that we're bringing in as a result of what we've done for the company.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely
right. The delight we've created for our customers.
Yeah. And not only that, I think it's also important to remind the people on the team of their successes, because sometimes you forget about all that you've done and you get discouraged when one thing fails. Well, if you can, as a manager, pull back up all the successes that you guys have had together, that kind of reignites a little bit of motivation within those people.
And I want to build off of that, because that's at the rear end, at the finishing end. But at the front end, we also need to paint a picture of what it is that our team is about, how it connects to our company's mission, and the difference we're going to make in the world as a result of our team's efforts. And then connect the dots for every single member of our team for the work that they're doing, and the difference it's going to make. One of the things we did in the book is to look at motivators, and my co-author Mickey Mantle and I had long conversations. There's a study done by a guy named Hertzberg back in the 50s across all of thought workers, but we tried to make it specific to programmers, and we believe that making a difference in the world is possibly the biggest motivator for those of us who become technologists. We become technologists in part to make an impact on the world.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think when I look at with my team, whenever I can take a user story or requirement and turn it into an actionable story that kind of hits home, whether it's like, I think at one point, this is many years ago, I've told this story probably way too many times, where we had a requirement to move a button on a close form on a mobile app for our technicians, basically, so that before they put in their notes, they would save something and then go back and choose their close codes and close it. And it was like a bunch of clicks, a bunch of things. And after doing a field trip and riding around with them, we realized that that's not their real process, that they waited at the end of the day and typically closed all of their tickets. And, and telling a story about how, it's taking them, 10 or 15 minutes to close out their tickets after their shift's done, instead of going home to spend time with their families. Why don't we make a bulk close option to let them do that in mass and save 10 minutes from having to open up every ticket, go down on the bottom, put in their codes, let's make it where it can do it in bulk and let the people go home 10 minutes earlier and play soccer with their kids. And that changed, the motivation for the team.
Great. That's wonderful.
So, gosh, we've been going for an hour now. So Ron, how can people pick up a copy of your book and learn more about you and connect with you on topics that they may have questions about, if they want to learn more about leading, programmers and software development teams?
You're also managing the unmanageable is on Amazon. And you're looking for the one with the black cover, because the white cover's the first edition's still there. You're looking for the one with the black cover, which is the second edition and has the additional chapter in it, and we've updated it throughout. You can go to managingtheunmanageable.net, and just be aware that manageable's got an E in there, manage with E-A-able. Because people leave that off sometimes and then can't find it. Managingtheunmanageable.net. ronlichty.com is my own personal site for my own professional site for my consulting business in making software development hum and transforming chaos to clarity in software development, which is what I realize is the part of managing that I love is just helping teams find that humming place for their team, and so that's the part I love. And so you can contact me through either of those websites.
Awesome, and I'll link that up in the show notes, the book, your website, and all that good stuff, so people can reach you that way as well. Ron, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Great. I should add one more thing, which is I'm also
Sure.
the co-author of the study of product team performance. And the study of product team performance, we ask people on teams all over the world to characterize the performance of their team. Is it high performance or low performance or something in between? Then we ask about practices, and we look at what correlates with high performance teams. And that's free. And the studies are pointed to off of my website, off of ronlichty.com.
Okay, cool. Yeah, definitely want to include that so people can find out more about that. I think that's really important as well. Well, Ron, thanks again. I really appreciate it.
Hey, it's been fun talking with you, John.
If you enjoyed that episode, please leave a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. I'd greatly appreciate that. And also, don't forget to check out merch. We have some t-shirts that I've designed that are on at geekleader.com. You can click on the merchandise section there and check that out. And also, don't forget about the books from our guests. So if you like this guest and other guests that have written books, please go ahead and check that out at geekleader.com. I would greatly appreciate it, and I'm sure they would too.